The knife was already in Seth Turner's hand before he understood why. He had been feeding the fire, nothing more, the small orange flames licking at the dry reed bundles he'd cut that afternoon when the frogs stopped singing. All at once, as if some great hand had reached down and pressed a thumb over the whole marsh, the endless chorus of the Murkfin Delta went silent, and in that silence he heard the soft, deliberate suck of mud beneath a heavy foot. He did not stand. Years in the king's infantry had taught him that much a man on his feet against the dark was a man asking to be seen. He stayed low beside the fire, knife loose in his palm, and let his eyes drift past the flames into the black wall of cattails and cypress knees beyond his little stilt house. Something was circling him. He caught it only in pieces. A shoulder, broad as a barrel stave, moving between two trunks. A glint of firelight sliding along something curved and metal at a hip. Once, for the length of a single heartbeat, two eyes caught the light and threw it back gold, low to the ground and terribly patient, the way a heron watches a fish it has already decided to take. Seth had fought orcs. He had buried men who died screaming under orc axes on the Redwater line, had carried wounded brothers through smoke that stank of burning tents and burning flesh, had told himself for 3 years now, since he'd hung up his sword and taken a boat and a bit of trapping line and gone to live where no one wanted to live, that he was done with all of it. Done with killing things and done with being afraid of them. His hand did not shake. That surprised him more than the shape in the dark did. "I see you," he said low into the reeds. His voice did not carry far in the delta air, thick as it was with damp and rot and the sweet smell of night-blooming marsh flowers. "I have got nothing worth stealing, and I would rather not kill anybody tonight." The shape stopped moving. For a long moment there was nothing but the fire crackling and the far-off croak of a single brave frog deciding the danger had passed. Then, softly, unmistakably, he heard a low chuff of breath that might almost have been a laugh, and the shape withdrew, unhurried, sinking back into the black tangle of the swamp as if it had never been there at all. Seth sat by his fire until the sky went gray, the knife never leaving his hand. He told himself, when the sun finally broke pink and gold over the endless maze of channels and islands that made up the Murkfin Delta, that it had probably been a marsh bear, one of the big shaggy things that sometimes swam the deeper cuts looking for eggs. He told himself this for most of the day, while he ran his trot lines and checked his eel baskets and patched the leaking seam in his reed boat's hull with pitch that never seemed to fully cure in this cursed wet air. He did not entirely believe himself. Marsh bears did not wear knives on their hips. 3 years he had lived out here, alone on his little stilt house at the mouth of Willow Cut, 2 days' pole from the nearest trading post at Reed's End, and a lifetime away from the war that had taken most of what he used to call himself. He liked it that way. He liked that the Delta did not ask him questions about what he had done or what he had seen. The heron did not care that he still woke some nights with his hands already reaching for a sword that was not there. The eels did not flinch at the old burn scar that ran up his forearm. Out here, a man could simply be a man who caught fish and mended nets and slept when he was tired, and that was enough. That had been enough for 3 years. The second night he built his fire a little larger than usual, and told himself it was only because the damp had gotten into his bones. She came back before the moon had fully cleared the cypress line. This time he heard her earlier, a soft splash of something wading through the shallow channel behind his house, the particular hush of someone trying, and mostly succeeding, to move quietly through standing water. He did not reach for the knife this time. He only sat very still, his back against the warm wood of his own doorframe, and watched the dark. She circled again, farther out than before, a slow, deliberate loop through the reeds that never quite let the firelight catch her whole. But this time, when she passed nearest, he saw enough to know he had not imagined the night before. She was enormous, not fat, never that, but built with the kind of density that made a man's mouth go dry, shoulders wide enough to carry a felled tree, arms roped with muscle beneath skin the deep mottled green-gray of old river stone. She moved through the mud like she weighed nothing at all, each footfall placed with a huntress's care. He caught the curve of a tusk catching moonlight, the long dark braid of her hair swinging heavy down her spine, the glint of a broad curved blade riding her hip beside a quiver of bone-fletched arrows. And there low on her side, dark against the darker leather, a wound. Not fresh, but not old either. A stain that had soaked through and dried and cracked, and from the stiff way she favored that side even in her careful stalking walk, had not been properly tended. "You are hurt," Seth said, before he had decided to say anything at all. The circling stopped. For the first time, she turned to face the fire directly, and he saw her clearly at last. A face all sharp planes and fierce beauty, green-gray skin drawn tight over strong cheekbones, tusks small and neat where they pushed past her lower lip, eyes the deep amber gold of good whiskey, narrowed now on him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. She wore fitted leathers, dark and well-worn, laced snug across a powerful torso, the leather trousers wrapped tight to her thighs and bound at the calf with cord. A huntress's traveling gear, made for speed through brush and water both, and it fit her like it had been cut for no other body but hers. She did not answer him. She only watched him for 3 long heartbeats, gold eyes flicking once to the knife he had set down beside the fire, then back to his face, before she melted backward into the reeds and was gone. Seth sat awake a second night, and this time he was not thinking about the war at all. He left food out the next evening. He was not entirely sure why he did it, a strip of smoked eel and half a corn cake, set on a flat stone at the edge of his firelight, far enough from his own seat that no one could call it a trap. He told himself it was only the old soldier's instinct, the same one that had made him share his last hardtack with a starving dog outside Fallowbridge once, years ago. He told himself a lot of things that third evening, sitting by his fire with his heart beating harder than it had any right to. She circled twice, slower this time, and on the second pass she paused near the stone. He watched her study the food the way a wary animal studies a trap it suspects but cannot quite resist. Then, quick as a snake, she snatched it up and retreated to the tree line to eat, watching him the entire time with those gold eyes, chewing with the deliberate, unhurried menace of something that wanted him to know exactly how sharp her teeth were. When she had finished, she did not vanish immediately. She stood at the edge of the firelight, one massive hand resting on the pommel of her curved blade, and for the first time she spoke. "Why?" she said, her voice low and rough and carrying a faint growl beneath the common tongue, as if the words had to fight their way past teeth built for tearing rather than talking. "Do you not run, human, or scream, or shoot?" "Would it help?" Seth asked. "You are 3 times my size, and I have seen what an orc blade does to a man's ribs. Running seems like a poor use of my last hours." Something flickered across her face, not quite a smile, but close kin to one. "A poor use," she repeated, tasting the words. "You are strange, small man." "Seth," he said. "Seth Turner, not small, just normal-sized for a human." "Glacia," she said, after a pause long enough that he understood she had weighed the cost of giving even that much away. "Glacia Earthshaker." And then, before he could ask anything more, she was gone again into the dark, leaving him alone with his fire and a name that he found himself turning over and over in his mind long after the coals had gone to ash, like a smooth stone he could not stop touching in his pocket. She circled his fire a third night, and this time when she came, she did not circle at all. Seth had built the fire a little smaller that night, and set 2 flat stones near it instead of one, and told himself this meant nothing. He was still telling himself that when the reeds parted without a sound and Glacia Earthshaker walked out of the dark and into the full light of his fire, and simply sat down across from him, cross-legged, her curved blade laid deliberately across her knees where he could see it and she could reach it, gold eyes steady on his face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire popped and hissed. Somewhere out in the black water, something large slid beneath the surface with barely a ripple. 3 nights, Seth said finally, because the silence had gone on long enough that his soldiers' instincts were screaming that stillness this complete usually meant an ambush. "You have been watching me 3 nights. I would like to know why if you are willing to tell me." Glash's jaw worked. Up close in full firelight, he could see the wound at her side more clearly, an ugly gash, half-healed and inflamed at the edges, the kind of wound that came from a blade swung in earnest, not from any accident of the swamp. There were other marks too, older ones, pale scars threading her forearms, and beneath all of it a bone-deep exhaustion that no huntress of her evident skill would let show unless she had been running hard for a very long time. "A man who does not run when he should," she said slowly, "is either a fool or he is brave or he has nothing left to lose. I have watched 3 nights to learn which. And which am I? I do not know yet." She said it without apology, the honesty of it striking him harder than any insult could have. "But you left me food. A man setting a trap does not feed the animal first. And a fool would have run screaming to that trading post 2 days south by now and brought hunters back with him." "I do not much care for hunters," Seth said, "or trading posts if I am honest. Too many people asking questions I do not want to answer." Something in her gaze sharpened at that, a flicker of understanding passing between them, soldier to something like a soldier, the particular recognition of two creatures who had both seen enough of war to want no more of it. "You have killed," she said. "It was not a question." "I have," Seth admitted. "In a uniform a long time ago on a border I do not miss. I do not want to do it again. Not you, not anyone." He held her gaze, steady as he could make it despite the way his pulse hammered at his throat. "You are hurt, and you have been running from something, and you have spent 3 nights deciding whether I am the kind of man who would put a knife in your back for it. I am not. That is the only answer I have to give you." For a long moment Glasha said nothing at all. Then slowly, deliberately, she reached down and unbuckled the strap that held her sword scabbard to her hip, and set the whole weapon down on the mud between them. Not thrown away, not surrendered, but placed, the way one warrior might set down arms in the presence of another they had decided, provisionally, to trust. 3 days ago," she said, "my half-brother put a blade through our mother's throat while she slept, and named himself matriarch of the Earthshaker clan by right of murder instead of right of blood. I was matriarch's daughter and heir by the old law. Now I am prey, hunted through this rotting swamp by his tracking party, because a living heir is a threat to a stolen throne, and Kralgesh does not do things by halves." The fire cracked. Somewhere a heron startled up off the water with a shriek that made Seth's hand twitch toward a knife he did not draw. "I am sorry," he said, and meant it with a weight that surprised him. "For your mother. You did not kill her." Glasha's voice had gone flat, controlled, the voice of someone holding grief at arm's length by main force, because there was no room yet to let it in. "You owe me no apology for it. But I will tell you plainly, human, since you have earned 3 nights of honesty from me, Kralgash's hunters are still in this swamp, and they are good at their work, and any man who shelters me becomes a target for their arrows the moment they find my trail leading to his door." "Then I suppose," Seth said, and felt something settle in his chest as he said it. Some old certainty from before the war had taught him to distrust his own convictions. "We had better make sure they do not find it." Glasha Earthshaker looked at him for a long, long moment across the fire, gold eyes searching his face for the lie she plainly expected to find there. When she did not find it, something in her powerful shoulders eased, fractionally, the coiled readiness of a huntress who has decided, at least for tonight, that she does not have to be ready to run. 3 nights I watched you," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I have never sat at a human's fire before." "Well," Seth said, and found himself almost smiling despite everything, despite the danger she just laid at his feet like a second sword. "There is a first time for most things." She stayed the night, sleeping, or pretending to sleep. He was fairly sure it was pretending at first on the far side of the fire, her sword within easy reach, one eye seeming to stay open even in rest. Seth did not sleep much either. He lay on his own side of the flames and watched the strange, fierce, beautiful shape of her across the dying coals and thought, with the particular clarity of a man whose life has just quietly and irrevocably changed direction, that he had not felt this awake, this alive, in longer than he could remember. The days that followed moved fast, the way a river moves fast when it has finally found the crack in a dam. He tended her wound properly the next morning, boiling water over the fire and cleaning the gash with a poultice of crushed marsh root that his old sergeant had taught him years ago, back when field medicine was the only kind either of them could afford. Glacia submitted to this with a stoic, faintly amused patience that told him she was used to far worse care, or none at all, and watched his hands work with an attention that made his face go warm despite the coolness of the morning. "You have gentle hands for a soldier," she said, when he finally tied off the bandage. "I had a good teacher," Seth said. "Man kept half his company alive through the worst winter of the war with nothing but boiled roots and stubbornness." "And you," Glacia said, tilting her head, studying him with those gold eyes in a way that made him distinctly aware of how close she was sitting, how the morning light caught the strong line of her jaw, the faint dusting of old scars at her collarbone, where the laces of her leathers had loosened. "What kept you alive?" Seth considered the question longer than it probably deserved. "Wanting to come home to something," he said finally, "even when I was not sure what that something was." Glacia did not answer that, but she did not look away either, and something passed between them in that silence that felt heavier than words. They decided, without much discussion, that Seth Stilthouse was no longer safe, a fixed point that any tracker worth his salt would eventually find, especially once Crawlgash's hunters widened their search past whatever ground they had already covered. Seth had spent 3 years learning the Delta's secret paths, the hidden channels that flooded and drained with the tides in ways that confused any boat not steered by someone who had memorized them by feel, and he put that knowledge to use now, guiding his narrow reed boat through cuts so overgrown with hanging moss and cypress knees that a stranger would swear they led nowhere at all. Glacia sat in the bow, her great frame making the little boat ride low in the brown water, her sword across her knees, her eyes never still, always scanning the tree line, the water, the sky. She was, Seth learned quickly, an extraordinary hunter in her own right. She read the swamp signs better than most men who had lived there their whole lives, spotting the broken reed stem, the disturbed mud, the too quiet stretch of water that meant something large and hungry was near, long before Seth himself noticed anything at all. "There," she said on the second day, pointing to a scuff on a mudbank that Seth would have walked right past. "Boot print. Human-made but recent and deep, a man carrying weight moving fast, not a trapper's stride, a hunter's, Crawlgash's men, or bounty men he has hired from your own kind," her mouth twisted with distaste. "My brother is not proud. He will pay coin to human trackers if it buys him my head faster." Seth felt something cold settle in his stomach at that, but he only nodded and steered the boat harder into the reeds, taking a channel so narrow the hull scraped mud on both sides, until the print and the open water beyond it had vanished behind a curtain of hanging vines. That night, camped on a small hummock of dry ground barely large enough for both of them, Glacia finally asked him the question he had been half expecting since the first night at his fire. "Why do you help me, Seth Turner? You are no fool. You know what it costs a human to shelter an orc fleeing her own clan's blades. Coin, safety, perhaps your life. What do you gain?" Seth stared into the small fire he had allowed himself, small enough not to be seen far, and thought about all the answers that would be true, and yet somehow not the truth at all. Because it was the decent thing. Because he had been a soldier once and knew the particular horror of being hunted by your own. Because 3 nights of watching her circle his fire had done something to him he did not yet have words for, had made him feel, for the first time in 3 long lonely years, like something in the world still wanted him to be brave. "I do not know that I gain anything," he said honestly, "but I know what it costs to be alone with no one at your back. I have lived that for 3 years. I would not wish it on you even if you were not. He stopped himself. Even if I were not what, Glacia said, and there was something dangerously soft in her voice now, something that made the small hairs on his arm stand up. Even if I did not want you to stay, Seth said finally, the words out before he could think better of them, raw and simple and true. Glacia went very still. Across the little fire, her gold eyes held his, and for a long moment neither of them breathed. Then slowly, she reached out one large hand and laid it with surprising gentleness against the side of his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw with a care that seemed almost disbelieving, as though she were testing whether he was real. "No human has ever said such a thing to me and meant it," she said quietly. "I mean it," Seth said, and turned his face just enough to press his lips against her palm, feeling her breath catch at the small, deliberate gesture. She did not pull away. If anything, she leaned closer, her free hand coming up to catch the front of his shirt, drawing him toward her with a huntress's directness that left no room for hesitation. And when their mouths finally met, it was not gentle at all. It was hungry, fierce. 3 days of tension and 3 nights of careful circling breaking loose all at once. Her tusks a careful danger against his lip that only made the kiss feel more real, more dangerous, more his. Seth's hands found her waist, careful of her healing wound, and she made a low sound against his mouth that he felt more than heard, a sound of hunger and relief tangled together. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Glacia's forehead rested against his, her gold eyes half-lidded, fierce and soft all at once. "I do not do this lightly, Seth Turner," she murmured. "An earthshaker does not give her mouth to a man who does not matter to her." "Good," Seth said, his voice rough, "because I did not kiss you lightly either." They reached Reed's End on the 4th day, needing supplies, dried meat, fresh bandages, pitch for the boat's hull that had begun to leak again in earnest. Seth had traded there for years and knew most of the folk by name, or near enough, and he told himself the visit would be simple, quick, unremarkable. He was wrong within minutes of tying up at the rough wooden dock. Reed's End was a scatter of stilt buildings connected by rope bridges and plank walkways, built up on pilings above the tide-flooded ground, with a single trading post at its center that also served as the settlement's only tavern. A dozen or so people were about their business on the docks and walkways when Seth's reed boat came gliding in, and every single one of them froze the instant Glacia rose from the bow, tall and unmistakable, her leathers dark against the pale morning sky. "Orc!" Someone shouted, and within a breath the calm business of the morning had shattered into shouting and the scrape of drawn steel and the particular metallic click of crossbows being cocked. "She is with me," Seth called out, stepping quickly between Glacia and the nearest of the gathering crowd, a heavy-set man named Dobbs who ran the trading post and had a crossbow already leveled with hands that trembled with more fear than steadiness. "Dobbs, put that down. She is not here to harm anyone." "Not here to harm anyone," Dobbs repeated, disbelieving, his eyes flicking between Seth's face and the enormous armed orc woman standing behind him. "Seth Turner, that is an Orc Huntress standing on my dock with a sword on her hip, and you are telling me to put my crossbow down." "I am telling you," Seth said, standing his ground even as more of the settlement's folk gathered, drawn by the shouting, hands finding hatchets and gaffing hooks and whatever else came near, "that if you loose that bolt, you will need to get through me first, and I have known you 11 years, Dobbs, and you know I do not make idle promises." A woman near the back of the crowd, Myril, who kept the settlement's small chapel of the river gods, pushed forward, her face pale but set. "There is a bounty notice nailed to the trading post door not 3 days old," she said. "Orc clan seal on it, offering good coin for an Orc Huntress matching that very description, wanted for treachery against her own clan chief. You would shelter a criminal, Seth." Seth felt Glacia go very still behind him, and when he glanced back he saw her jaw tight, her hand resting on her sword hilt though she had not drawn it, gold eyes scanning the crowd not with fear, but with the terrible calm readiness of someone calculating exactly how many of these people she would have to fight through if it came to that, and how many she might have to kill. Her clan chief murdered his own mother to steal her throne, Seth said, loud enough for the whole gathered crowd to hear, and now hunts his own sister to keep it. That bounty was not written by justice. It was written by a murderer trying to finish the job. I have fought in a real war, most of you know that, and I have seen enough men lie about their reasons for killing to know the smell of it when I hear it read off a nailed-up notice. The crowd did not disperse, not entirely, but the crossbows wavered, uncertain hands finding the doubt he had planted. Dobbs, to his credit, lowered his weapon first, some old debt of friendship or simple weariness winning out over fear. "I have known you 11 years, like you said," Dobbs muttered. "Never known you to lie to me, Turner, though the gods know this is a strange hill to finally start on." He glanced past Seth at Glacia, and something in his gruff trader's face softened, fractionally, at whatever he saw there, perhaps the weariness, perhaps the wound still healing at her side, visible where her leathers gapped slightly. "Get your supplies and get gone before the wrong folk hear an orc's been sighted at Reed's End. There is more than one bounty hunter passes through here, and not all of them will stop to ask questions the way I did." They left within the hour, laden with what supplies Dobbs's coin-shy conscience allowed him to sell them at only a modest markup, and Seth did not fully breathe easy again until Reed's End had vanished behind 3 bends of hidden channel. "You did not have to stand between me and their bolts," Glacia said quietly, once they had made camp again, this time on a small floating platform of woven reeds Seth had built years ago for exactly this purpose, a hidden refuge invisible from any main channel, reachable only by a route he had memorized inch by inch. "I could have fought them, or fled. I did not want you to have to do either," Seth said simply. "You have been fighting and fleeing long enough. Let someone stand beside you for once instead of making you do it alone." Glacia studied him for a long moment in the fading light, something unguarded moving behind her gold eyes. "Where I come from," she said slowly, "a warrior who stands between another and danger without being asked, without expecting payment, that is not a small thing, Seth Turner. Among my people that is close kin to a claiming." "Is that so?" Seth felt his pulse quicken at the word, at the weight she gave it. And what would an Orc Huntress do if a man made such a claim on her? Glacia's answering smile was slow and sharp and utterly without mercy, and it undid him completely. "She would decide," she said, moving toward him across the small platform with the unhurried certainty of a predator who has already caught her prey and simply enjoys the last few steps, whether he was worth claiming back. That night on the small hidden platform surrounded by nothing but reeds and stars and the distant call of night birds, Glacia Earthshaker made her decision plain, and Seth Turner soldier, trapper, a man who had spent 3 lonely years convincing himself he needed nothing and no one learned exactly what it felt like to be wanted, wholly and without reservation, by someone who could have had anyone at all and had chosen, deliberately, fiercely, him. She was tender in ways he had not expected from someone built for war, her large hands careful of every old scar on his body the way his had been careful of hers, and when she finally drew him down against her, skin to skin in the warm dark, murmuring his name like it was something precious, she had only just discovered she was allowed to keep. Seth understood with sudden, overwhelming clarity that whatever happened next, whatever Kralgash's hunters or the wide, unfriendly world still had waiting for them, he did not intend to let her go again. Afterward, wrapped together beneath a single worn blanket while the delta breathed and murmured around them, she traced one finger slowly along the old burn scar on his forearm and told him, low and rough with something like wonder, that she had never once in her life wanted to stay anywhere the way she wanted to stay here with him. They had 4 days of something like peace after that. 4 days of poling slowly through hidden channels toward the old Reedfang clan grounds, an ally clan Glacia believed would still honor the true bloodline of the Earthshaker matriarchy, and might rally warriors to challenge Kralgash's stolen claim. 4 days of learning each other in the easy, unhurried way that only comes when danger has, for a little while, looked elsewhere, Glasha teaching Seth the proper way to read a heron's flight for warning of a predator upstream. Seth teaching her the words to an old marching song that made her laugh. A real laugh, rich and startled, the first he had heard from her. 4 nights of falling asleep tangled together beneath the stars, with her taking the first watch and refusing, every single time, to wake him for the second, because, she told him gruffly, when he caught her at it, she had gone her whole life needing no one to guard her rest, and found she did not mind, this once, being the one who guarded his. It could not last, of course. Seth had been a soldier long enough to know that peace this easy was usually a debt come due later, all at once with interest. The ambush came on the 5th morning, at a narrow crossing where the channel pinched between 2 mudbanks thick with cypress, the kind of place any tracker worth his coin would know to watch. They came out of the reeds on both sides at once, 6 of them, 4 orcs in Kralgash's dark clan colors and 2 human trackers Dobbs had warned them about, all of them well armed, all of them clearly expecting an easy capture of a wounded, fleeing woman, and whatever fool human had been sheltering her. They did not get one. Glasha moved before Seth had even fully registered the danger, up out of the boat in a single fluid motion, her curved blade already singing free of its scabbard, meeting the first attacker's axe with a ringing clash that sent splinters of wood flying from the boat's rail. Seth had his own knife out and his back against hers within a heartbeat, old instincts flooding back with a clarity he had almost forgotten, and for a long, brutal, breathless span of time, the narrow channel became a chaos of steel and shouting, and mud churned white with violence. Seth took a shallow cut along his ribs from a human tracker's short sword, a burning line of pain he barely registered until later, too busy driving his own blade into the man's thigh to buy Glasha the half-second she needed to finish off the orc pressing her from the other side. She fought like something out of an old war song, terrible and beautiful all at once, her strength and speed making a mockery of the numbers against her. And when the last of Kralgash's hunters finally broke and fled back into the reeds rather than face her blade again, she turned immediately, fiercely, to Seth, her hands finding the wound at his side with a desperation that had nothing calm left in it at all. "You are hurt," she said, echoing unknowingly the very words he had first spoken to her 3 nights before that first fire, and there was real fear in her voice now, raw and unhidden. "It is shallow," Seth said, though the pain was considerable. "I have had worse." "You will not have worse again while I am beside you," Glasha said fiercely, tearing a strip from her own sleeve to bind the wound with hands that shook, just slightly, with an anger and a fear that Seth understood, suddenly and completely, was not for herself at all. "I will not lose you to my brother's cowardice, Seth Turner. I did not survive 3 nights of testing you at that fire only to watch you bleed out in some rotting channel because of blood that is not even yours to bleed for." "It became mine," Seth said quietly, "the moment you sat down at my fire." They pressed on, wounded but alive, and reached the fringes of the Reedfang clan territory 2 days later, only to find the encampment already burned, hide tents smoldering, the clan scattered or worse, Kralgash's colors flying from a crude standard driven into the mud where a chieftain's banner should have stood. He had moved faster than Glasha had believed possible, striking any who might rally to her cause before she could ever reach them, and the sight of it broke something loose in her that Seth had not seen before, not fear, but a grief so total it left her kneeling in the mud among the wreckage, her great shoulders shaking, for the first time since her mother's murder truly allowing herself to feel the weight of all she had lost. Seth knelt beside her and said nothing at all, only put his arms around her as best his smaller frame allowed, and held on and let her grieve, and did not once let go. It was there, among the ashes of the Reedfang camp, that Kralgash's message found them nailed to a burned tent pole in the crude common-tongue script of a clan that dealt often with human traders, impossible to mistake for anything but what it was. Come to the sunken stones with no blade drawn and surrender your claim, and the human dies slow. Run again, and I send his head to whatever human settlement will take it, so all your kind learn what it costs to shelter an orc's enemy. Glacia read it twice, her face going the color of old ash, and then she looked at Seth with something in her eyes that terrified him far more than any of Kralgash's hunters had. "He does not have me to threaten," she said quietly. "So he has decided to threaten what I would trade myself for. He is not wrong to guess it would work. Glacia, I will not let him kill you for loving me," she said, the words breaking loose fierce and raw, the first time either of them had said the word aloud between them, and it landed with a weight that made Seth's chest ache even amid the terror of everything else. "I would rather kneel before that murderer, and let him take my life, than let him take yours for the crime of standing beside me." "And I," Seth said, catching her hands in both of his, holding them steady against the tremor he could feel running through her, "would rather die beside you than live safe somewhere without you. So we are not doing this your way, Glacia. We are doing it together, or not at all." She did not answer that in words. She only pulled him close and kissed him with a desperate fierceness that tasted of salt and grief, and something that might, in a kinder world, have simply been called hope. And then she rose, and armed herself, and told him the way to the sunken stones. The sunken stones proved to be an old ring of half-drowned standing rocks at the delta's deepest heart, ringed by black mud that Seth recognized immediately, with a soldier's grim instinct, as quicksand, a place chosen precisely because there was nowhere to run. Kralgash was waiting for them atop the largest of the stones when they arrived, a broad-shouldered orc with a face like a slammed door, cruelty etched into every line of it, flanked by a dozen warriors, and tied roughly to a leaning post driven deep into the mud below him, already caught by the wrists with rope biting into skin. Seth felt his blood run cold. Was not himself at all, but a decoy, a captured human trapper Kralgash's men had seized 2 days prior purely to bait the trap. Gagged and terrified, his eyes going wide and desperate at the sight of them arriving, Seth understood, in the space of a single racing heartbeat, that Kralgash had never actually captured him at all. The message had been a lie built on the assumption that Glacia would come running regardless, and the poor trapper tied to that post was about to pay the price meant for someone else entirely. There was no time to think through the horror of that. Kralgash's champion, a huge scarred warrior with an axe already raised, was already stepping toward the bound trapper, the blade catching the pale morning light, clearly meaning to make an example before negotiations had even properly begun, to show Glacia exactly how little her surrender would be worth to buy anyone's safety. No. Seth was moving before the word had even fully left his mouth, sprinting across ground he knew, from years reading this treacherous delta, was thick with hidden sinkholes, throwing himself forward with no plan beyond the desperate animal need to stop that axe before it fell. He was not fast enough. He would never have been fast enough. The axe was already at the top of its arc, already beginning its terrible descent toward the bound trapper's exposed neck, and Seth's outstretched hand was still a dozen strides away. Glacia Earthshaker was faster. She had broken into a full sprint the instant Kralgash's champion raised his weapon, covering the distance with a huntress's explosive speed that no human eye could quite follow, and she reached the post a full heartbeat before Seth did, close enough that, when her curved blade came up to intercept the falling axe, the two weapons met with a shower of sparks and a ringing clash that seemed to shake the very stones around them. Close enough that the champion's blade stopped a bare hand's width from the trapper's straining throat, trembling there against the sheer, furious strength of her parry. "You would waste an innocent life to make a point to me, brother," Glacia snarled, shoving the champion's blade aside and back with a strength that sent the huge warrior stumbling, When I'm standing right here, chaos erupted. Kralgesh's warriors surged forward, and Seth was there in the same instant, cutting the trapper's bonds with his knife even as Glasha turned to meet the champion's second attack, her blade a blur of desperate, furious motion, buying them both the seconds they needed. The freed trapper scrambled away toward the tree line without looking back, and Seth spun to find himself facing Kralgesh's spearpoint himself, close enough to smell the orc chieftain's breath, cold and rank with old blood. So this is the human she debases herself for, Kralgesh sneered, spear leveled at Seth's throat. I will enjoy watching her watch you die. You will not touch him. Glasha's voice cut through the chaos like a blade of its own, and Seth turned enough to see her standing over the fallen champion, her sword point at the man's throat, her chest heaving, blood not her own. He prayed, streaking one arm. I claim challenge right, Kralgesh. By the old law of our mother's line, trial by combat for the true seat of the Earthshaker matriarchy. You took the throne with a blade in our mother's sleeping throat, like the coward you have always been. Face me now, in the light, with witnesses, or admit before every warrior here that you have never once been strong enough to hold what you stole honestly. A murmur ran through the gathered warriors. The old law plainly still meant something to them, even under Kralgesh's rule, and Seth watched the chieftain's face twist with fury at being cornered by his own clan's ancient custom, unable to refuse the challenge without admitting a cowardice that would cost him every warrior's respect he had left. Fine, Kralgesh spat, shoving his spear at a nearby warrior and drawing his own broad blade instead. I will enjoy silencing you myself, sister, and then I will feed your human's remains to the fenworms while your body still cools. Glasha, Seth started, every protective instinct in him screaming to intervene, but she caught his eye across the churned mud and shook her head once, firm and certain. This is mine to finish, Seth Turner, she said, and there was no fear in her voice at all, only a terrible, clean resolve. Trust me now as you trusted me that first night at your fire. He did. He stepped back, his heart in his throat, and watched. The duel that followed was brutal and fast, and utterly without mercy on either side. Two powerful warriors trading blows that would have killed a lesser fighter outright. Blade ringing on blade across the ancient standing stones, while the gathered warriors watched in a silence broken only by grunts of effort and the wet slap of mud underfoot. Kralgesh was strong and cruel and fought with the ugly efficiency of a man who had never once fought fair in his life. But Glasha fought with something he did not have, something Seth recognized from the very first night he had watched her circle his fire with such patient, deliberate care. She fought like someone who had something worth surviving for. The end came fast, almost too fast for Seth's straining eyes to follow Kralgesh overextending on a heavy downward strike, Glasha pivoting inside its arc with a speed that seemed to defy her own considerable size, her blade sweeping up and across in a single brutal motion that ended with Kralgesh on his knees in the mud, her sword point resting steady against the side of his throat, his own weapon fallen useless beside him. Yield, Glasha said, her voice carrying flat and final across the silent clearing, or die the coward's death you have earned twice over. Kralgesh's face twisted with hatred, but the fight had gone out of him entirely, and after a long, bitter moment he lowered his head. I yield, he spat. The seat is yours by right of blood and blade both, as the old law demands. The gathered warriors are Kralgesh's own hunters and enforcers, watching all of this with the particular stillness of soldiers who have just watched their chief's authority collapse before their eyes began, one by one, to kneel, until the whole clearing was full of bent heads and lowered weapons, acknowledging in the ancient, wordless way of their people that the true matriarch of the Earthshaker clan had returned to claim what was rightfully hers. Glasha did not kill her brother. Seth watched her consider it, watched the terrible weight of her mother's murder pass behind her gold eyes as she stood over him with her blade still raised, and then watched her lower the sword instead, some fierce and hard-won mercy winning out over the vengeance she was surely owed. "You will live," she said, "exiled from Earthshaker land forever, stripped of clan and kin, to carry the weight of what you did to our mother every day for the rest of whatever miserable life you make for yourself. That is worse than any quick death I could give you, and you know it." Kralgesh said nothing. Two of the warriors escorted him away without a word, and did not look back. The days that followed were quieter, gentler, than anything Seth had known since the war had first taken him from whatever ordinary life he might otherwise have lived. Glash's reclaimed clan, those Earthshaker warriors and their families who had fled Kralgesh's coup into the deeper delta, rather than swear false loyalty to a murderer, began returning within the week, drawn back by word carried swift and eager along the hidden channels. The true matriarch had returned, and the old law had been honored, and the throne stolen by murder had been reclaimed by blood and courage both. Seth's own wound healed clean under Glash's careful, insistent care, and the shallow cut along his ribs left only a thin, pale scar to match the ones already scattered across his arms, one more mark of survival among many. Though this one, unlike the others from the war, he found he did not mind at all. This one he had earned protecting something worth protecting. It was on the 7th day after the duel, at the reformed Earthshaker camp, beside a wide clear channel where the reeds grew golden in the autumn light, with every returned clan member gathered in a great circle around the central fire pit, and the newly raised matriarch's banner snapping overhead, that Glasha Earthshaker did the thing that Seth would remember. He knew already, for the rest of whatever long life he was lucky enough to live. She had summoned him forward into the center of the circle, in front of every warrior, every elder, every child of the reclaimed clan, and for one terrifying, uncertain moment Seth had no idea what was about to happen, whether some formal decree awaited him, some judgment on what right a human trapper had to stand at the heart of an orc clan's most sacred gathering ground. Then Glasha Earthshaker, matriarch of her people, huntress who feared nothing in this world or any other, who had circled his fire 3 careful nights before she had ever trusted him enough to sit, sank slowly to one knee before him in the mud, her great head bowed, her curved blade laid flat across her open palms, and offered up toward him in a gesture that drew a collective, indrawn breath from every witness in that circle. "Among the Earthshaker line," she said, her voice carrying clear and unshaking across the silent gathering, "the matriarch does not ask her council's leave to choose her heart's own consort. She kneels before the whole clan and she names him, and by that naming he is claimed, and any who would challenge that claim must challenge her blade to do it." She lifted her gold eyes to his, fierce and open and utterly unguarded, more vulnerable in that single upturned gaze than Seth had ever seen her, even wounded, even grieving. "I circled your fire 3 nights, Seth Turner, before I trusted you enough to sit at it. I have circled every doubt I ever held about whether a human man could matter to me the way you have mattered, every single day since. I am done circling. I kneel before my whole clan, and I name you mine protector who stood between me and a mob's fear, blade who stood between me and my brother's cruelty, heart who stayed when every reason in this hard world told you to run. Will you have me, Seth Turner, as I have chosen you?" Seth's throat was too tight for a long moment to manage any words at all, his eyes stinging with something he did not bother to hide in front of this whole watching clan. When he finally found his voice, it came out rough, but sure, surer than anything he had said in his entire life. "I circled that fire alone for 3 long years before you ever came to it," he said. "I will not spend one more day circling anything, Glasha Earthshaker. Yes, I will have you. I have wanted to be had by you since the very first night you would not let me see your whole face in the firelight." A great sound rose up from the gathered clan then, not the wary silence he might have once feared from orc witnesses to such a claiming, but something warmer, wilder, a rising cheer of approval and welcome that swept through the circle like wind through the reeds, warriors striking their weapons against their shields in the old rhythm of celebration, elders calling out blessings in the clan's own tongue that Seth did not yet understand but felt. All the same, land warm and true against his heart. Glacia rose from her knee in one fluid motion and pulled him into her arms in front of the entire gathered clan, and when she kissed him this time, it was neither the desperate hunger of their first stolen kiss nor the fierce urgency of the battle they had survived together, but something new entirely slow and certain and utterly unafraid, the kiss of two people who had found, against every hard likelihood the world had offered them, exactly where they belonged. They built their life together at the edge of the reformed Earthshaker camp, in a stilt house Seth raised with his own 2 hands on a wide, safe channel that Glacia herself had chosen for him, close enough to the clan's heart that she could rule as matriarch without ever being far from him, far enough that they still had their own quiet corner of the great delta to call entirely theirs. Word of the human trapper who had won an Orc Huntress's whole and fearless heart traveled slowly along the hidden channels and out to the trading posts beyond, and though there were some still, among both peoples, who muttered doubt at such a match, Dobbs at Reed's End was not among them. He sent, some months later, a small barrel of good pitch and a gruffly worded note wishing them well, which Glacia kept, to Seth's quiet amusement, in a place of honor beside her own sword. Seth never again woke in the night, reaching for a blade that was not there. He woke instead, most mornings, to the warm weight of Glacia Earthshaker's arm thrown across him, to gold eyes already open and watching him with the same fierce, unhidden tenderness she had first shown him circling his lonely campfire, 3 careful nights before she had finally, irrevocably, sat down and stayed.